Welcome back in, Geico Outkick Studios. I know many of you have been listening to our Wins and Losses podcast because I see the numbers and it keeps growing substantially. There are now 34 long-form interviews there to be able to listen to. The most recent, and by the way, fascinating characters, whether it's Kirk Herbstreit, Paul Feinbaum, Mike Leach. These are long-form conversations with hardly any commercials. They're podcast exclusive. I'd encourage all of you to check them out if you're going on trips, you got long drives, you just want an interesting conversation to listen to. The most recent is Megyn Kelly, formerly of Fox News, journalist, lawyer. We had an incredibly interesting conversation that came out on Monday, but I want to play a section of that interview for you now because the feedback has been so phenomenal on it. And if you like it, you can go download and listen to the whole thing. Just type in Clay Travis or Outkick on Stitcher, iTunes, wherever you are, and you'll see the Wins and Losses podcast hop up. But here we are, Megyn Kelly and me. Here's a part of our conversation. When do you actually confess to the partners and the people that you worked for and with at Jones Day that you were exploring in a serious way journalism? Like, how far into the process did you get before you were like, hey, this is, not guitar lessons that I'm just doing on the side. This is something that maybe I have an interest in.
So I kind of got discouraged. There I was with my resume tape thinking, okay, great, but I don't have a single connection, in news. I don't have anything on my resume to suggest I could do news. I just had that feeling that I'm sure a lot of people get, which is just apathy and self-doubt and, the desire to stay on my couch. And by the way, my therapist always says the desire to stay on one's couch should always be fought. Like that retreat is bad. It's almost always bad. And one day I was watching Lifetime television, Clay, and they ran this movie, Lifetime movie called The Jessica Savage Story. And she was this amazing journalist back in the late 70s, 80s who was making it in the man's industry, one of the only women. She was like Jessica and Connie Chung and a young Barbara Walters, and that was it. And it was a great story. It ended in ruination, sadly. But her rise up
as most Lifetime stories do. At least she didn't get murdered by her husband.
Right. But I was inspired, to try. So I started cold calling news directors. And every single one was like, bye. No one wanted to talk to me. They didn't want to help me. They didn't want to give me a chance. And finally I got smart, and I decided to walk my tape into the news station in D.C., WJLA. And they had a cable channel that was like their sister. And I thought, maybe they'll pop me on that cable channel that not a lot of people are watching. I got a shot there. And I went in, I met this guy, Bill Lord, who was the news director for both. And God bless that guy, he put me on the air. So we started just one day a week. And at that point, I had to disclose to Jones Day that I was doing this because, A, they might see me, and B, you could create an ethical, conflict depending on what I was reporting on. So I sort of said, it's just going to be fun. I just want to try it out. And they were a little leery, but said, okay, do it. And then I was doing pretty well, and Bill Lord said, well, how about you do 2 days a week? So I did Saturdays and Sundays, and I did the law job the other days. And then they came to me and said, well, how about you do another day a week? And that would have required me to go part-time at Jones Day. And so I went, I spoke with the head of general litigation, a guy named Tim Cullen, who was so great. And he said, MK, I'm sad because this feels like a trial separation, and those usually lead to divorce. And I said, Tim, it very well might, but I got to try. So he let me stay at Jones Day, part-time. And then eventually I decided it was time to make the full-time leap.
All right. So you're how old the first time you go on air with, I think it was WJLA, you said?
So that would have been 2003. So I was 32.
Okay, so you've never really done television before. You're 32 years old. You get to go on this relatively small station in Washington, D.C. What did you do the first time that you were on television?
The very first time I ever saw myself on television, it was taped, so I was clear. Right? It was a taped piece. But
and what do you remember do you remember the topic of the taped piece? Do you remember what you reported on?
I do. It was the very first thing I ever did was on a hurricane. And it was Hurricane Isabel that had gone through Virginia. And I thought for sure, I thought I was going to be doing mostly legal stuff because that had been my pitch. And I remember calling Bill Lord because my first day was a Friday, and I was like, "You probably don't need me, right? Because the storms come in, and you're not going to need a lawyer, legal expert type." And he goes, "If you don't already have rain boots and rain pants and rain slicker, you better go get them and get in here." I'm like, oh no. And so it was a crazy night, and I did a report on, and not that night, but the next day on the hurricane, and it was fine. But the first time I had to do a live shot where it's like, go, like I'd practiced on the streets of Chicago, was it was at Dulles Airport. And there was something going on with the airport and security, and they had a scare. This is back when we were still pretty close to 9/11, and there was a scare every other day. And it was deer in the headlights, and they're like, you can hear the anchor toss to you, and really I'm like, I don't know who the hell I am. Who the hell am I? Just say your name. Say something resembling anything. And I got through it, and I thought I had been totally incomprehensible. When I looked back at it later, it was okay. It wasn't hideous, but it was terrifying.
I'm Clay Travis. This is Wins and Losses. We're talking with Megyn Kelly. So do you go back like an athlete and study your early tapes in television to figure out what you're doing well? Or did you find that you kind of got a sense for how you were doing? What about the discipline of television came to you, and how did you get better?
I definitely went back and looked at the tapes, and I think that's a must-do, because it is a visual medium, and you have to see, or whatever the mechanism is, listen to yourself and see what works and what doesn't work. You may think you sound fine. When you go back and you watch yourself, you see a totally different product. So I did that for years when I first started, at WJLA and then at Fox News. But the truth is, that is a skill you only develop by doing it over and over and over. It's like typing. And you cannot type 70 words a minute before you've done 20, 30, 40, and so on. So I would just say yes to everything, which I think every young person in a job should do. I mean, I always tell the young people who are asking me for advice, if they want you to empty the trash, empty the trash. Like, say yes to every weekend shift, to working on Christmas. Have some gumption. Go after it. Don't be I'm above this kind of person. And that leads to opportunity, because the sad truth is it will set you apart from 90% of your competition. And it just happened to be, and in my profession, as it is in most, that makes you better. You get your 10,000 hours in, and before you know it, you're doing it almost effortlessly.
What I have found is, and this is probably the legal background as well, what I get to do now is make arguments, but instead of having to take, as you said earlier, sometimes you're on the wrong side of an argument. You're like, boy, I'd rather have the facts of that other side. Now, with the position that I'm in, and I think you get to do this now as well, you get to look at all the facts, array them as you see fit, and then make your case. And as you were talking about your legal career, it struck me having watched your television show, basically what you're doing is arguing in front of a jury every single night about cases and stories that matter the most to you in a compelling fashion, right? It's basically like an oral argument that you get to make every single night when you're doing a live television show.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges, but also rewards if you do it right, of doing that show in that way was taking really difficult subjects and condensing them in a way that my imaginary viewer, the one I picture in my head,
yes,
she's working all day.
Who do you picture, by the way? Who do you picture? Because I do that for my radio show, my television show too, an average person who's watching. Who in your mind is an average Megyn Kelly viewer?
I have a woman in my head named Madge who lives in Iowa. She works all day. She's got a couple of kids, and she and her husband come home from working at night, and they turn on the TV. Maybe they have a glass of wine, and they want to consume their news in a way that is easy to understand, somewhat entertaining, trustworthy, and that they don't have to work too hard to get. So it's my job to take something hugely complex, like a Supreme Court ruling on redistricting, and try to make Madge not have to work for it at all. If
Yes.
Madge has to hit the rewind button on the remote control, I have failed. I used to call it, it's like cool water going over a hot brain. That's how I want my news delivery to feel to the consumer. And if you have to try too hard on the air, you haven't tried hard enough prior to getting to air. But I will say, Clay, one of the things I like about you, and one of the things I think may be the solution to our entirely disgustingly broken media, is more lawyers delivering the news.
Yeah.
In whatever way works for them. Because lawyers, I think in their soul, they're programmed to understand at least both sides and to try in some way to recognize the other argument. I do, and I don't know if it's just that we're soulless hacks or, these trained elite arguers. The latter sounds better, but whatever it is, most lawyers I know, Dan Abrams is another, they're really good at being fair.
I don't think there's any doubt at all. I mean, what I always say on my show is I care about three things: the facts, the facts, the facts. And one of the things that troubles me the most about our country today is you can disagree with my opinions or your opinions or anybody's opinion out there in the world of media or your friends and family posting on social media all day. But if you start with incorrect facts, then you get to a place with an incorrect opinion. And so there's a lot of people who don't care about the factual basis, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. And it seems like we have lost that, particularly in a social media age. And I do think lawyers are better attuned to being able to consider both sides of an issue and at least understand the importance of facts, because what you're talking about is basically the skills of a great trial lawyer. And a great trial lawyer can take facts, which are honest and accurate, and put the best spin possible on them to advocate for the cause they believe in. But they know that the facts have to be right or the jury's not going to trust them, right, face to face.
Right.
It seems to me we've lost the ability to recognize the foundational basis of fact.
It's one of the things that is most disturbing me and most inspiring me to get back out there, because both sides do it, right? President Trump, I always say he doesn't have an adult relationship with the truth.
Yeah.
I think all of his years in real estate sort of led him to tolerate a certain level of, puffery, we would have called it in the law. And so he is, I think, by nature an optimist who tries to oversell positive outcomes. But he also, if he gets himself in trouble, he's not just going to level with you about what he did and why it wasn't a big deal. He's going to try to tell you the facts are other than what they are. That's a character trait that he has, for better or for worse. But on the left, you see like a post-factual world when it comes to discussions on tough subjects, like the transgender issue and the gender issue in general, that there's no more biological sex, and that, having certain genitalia is totally irrelevant to whether you're a woman or a man. I don't believe that's true scientifically. We can talk about what your life is like and how you want to be accepted, and I'm totally pro all of that. But there is a basis in science. And I don't like the silencing of the scientific community, or even in the, all the Black Lives Matter protests that we saw this summer. You can want to be an advocate against racism without making up lies about the police.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about George Floyd, but I'm talking about the lies that were put out there about the number of cases of police brutality, of police killings of black men. There are real data on that, and they've been either suppressed.
They're silenced.
Or
in fact,
misrepresented.
I've got it right here. I mean, that I keep because it's been such a big topic in the world of sports. A police officer is 17 and a half times as likely to be killed by a black potential suspect as a police officer is to kill an unarmed black man in this country, right? That's a fact. I'm reading directly from the Wall Street Journal. The data is clear and transparent and straightforward. That is factual basis. Now, we can talk once we have those facts in place about ways to make the country better based on our relationship between police and those that they consider suspects of crimes, whatever race they might be, right? To try to dial down the tension. But it's as if that fact makes people uncomfortable, and so you can't even have an honest conversation about how to fix things if you can't begin with a common basis of fact.
That's right, because they'll call you a racist. And
That's
no
right.
one wants to be called a racist. And it's sad because, look, I'm sort of a free agent now, right? So it's like I don't really care what they call me. They've already called me all the mean names, and I'm doing just fine. But I do worry about civilians, right, for lack of a better term, because they don't want to put themselves out there. I've got good friends who are, they're successful doctors and lawyers, and they can't even like a tweet without having to worry about
that's 100%
losing their
right.
job. And that's not okay. The data on police shootings or killings of black suspects are knowable. They are knowable. It's not a perfect science, but they have been reported for years. The Washington Post has been keeping a running tally of it all. And for some reason, and people can draw their own conclusions, these activists want us only to look at the percentage of black people in the population, which tends to be around 13%, and then look at the number of black people who are killed by police in a year. And that's just not the relevant data. They don't want you to factor in at all the level of black criminality. And the Wall Street Journal's been doing a great job in reporting the facts on this, but over 50% of the violent crimes in the major cities of this country are committed by black men. Now, the cops are not, they're not arresting women. That doesn't make them sexist against men. They're going after the people who are committing the crime. And so necessarily the interactions between those guys and police, they're going to go up. And they're fraught because if you resist arrest, and the data show that that's what's happened in virtually all these cases where a death results, your odds of getting injured or killed by the police officer go up exponentially.
That's an argument that is all factual based, right? I think it's an important one that needs to be discussed in the country. You couldn't say that on CNN today. You couldn't say that today on MSNBC, right? I really don't think you could.
No.
Why do you think, and you worked and had your own show and you did had a tremendous success at Fox News, why do you think our society, media culture, has created this world where there are facts that aren't allowed to be spoken on television on certain networks? And by the way, you can make it across the board, right? There are facts probably that make Fox News viewers uncomfortable that don't get shared very often. We don't have a Walter Cronkite of the world who's sitting down and kind of the arbiter that everybody trusts to be a great official, so to speak, of the world at large. How do we put the genie back in the bottle? Can we? Are things going to even get worse from here?
Boy, I mean, I think with what's happening with this sort of woke culture, the social justice warriors, it's going to be tough. That's a small group of Americans. They do not represent the majority in trying to cancel everybody and shut everybody up, but they're really loud. And the media they're in complete fealty to that small group. And so it's dangerous. And I'll tell you, there are so many intellectuals, black and white, but a lot of black intellectuals who are sort of pushing a more heterodox view, from Glenn Loury to Coleman Hughes, obviously Shelby Steele, Thomas Sowell. But so you can read black intellectuals who have done all the research on this and see what their worldview is. It would back up everything I just said, right? Read Jason Riley in the Wall Street Journal if you want to know the facts. But if a white person says it, they're going to call you a racist. So you just, to really know what's going on, you have to actually be prepared to take some punches in the face. But I think what's happened with the media is they're left. They're not just liberal. They're leftist. And they love to virtue signal. Early on in my career, I got sent down to cover the Duke, what we now know is the fake rape case with the lacrosse
the Duke
team.
lacrosse case, yes.
Yep. And I went down. When I first heard about that case, I was new to Fox. It was like 2005. And at the time, I was 34, so I was, not that far out of college. And I was like, these guys, they probably did it. Like lacrosse players and, they
You had preconceived stereotypes as a, girl who had gone to Syracuse. You're like, oh, I can see these stupid lacrosse guys doing something like this.
Of course, 100%.
By the way, everybody does. And then one of the great things about being a lawyer is you end up representing people that you're like, man, this guy seems like a total jerk. And then you start to look at the facts and you're like, man, maybe this is not very similar at all to what was initially reported. So that's fast. So you go down to Duke, and when do you start to have doubts about that case as a lawyer and you start to look at it because you're in a unique position there?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that happened before I left for North Carolina was Britt Hume, my boss in the D.C. Bureau, said, keep an open mind. And it was just a small piece of advice, but it was the best advice, right? Because it's just a good reminder that it really isn't about what I think. It's about where the facts lead. And I'm going down there on a fact-finding mission. So that's what I did. I went down, and Fox gave me the, latitude to develop sources. Normally they just have you tethered to a camera where you have to do a live shot every half hour on a big story like that. But they sent a different reporter to do that so I could actually develop facts. And it was very clear, if you just had an open mind, the facts did not support this woman's allegations. Her story started to fall apart very early. And I reported those, inconsistencies in her story and so on. And at the time, this is very early in my career, people were suggesting it was racist of me and even sexist of me to be, quote, siding with these three white privileged guys instead of this single mother black person who lived on sort of the Durham side as opposed to the Duke side. It's like there's two areas of Durham. One's less affluent than the other. And I just had to forge through that. You just had to say, okay, they're going to call me names, but I have to report the news. That's what I'm being paid to do. And you know who the other person was who was getting the facts right, who was on cable news at that time? Dan Abrams, who I mentioned earlier, a lawyer who came to MSNBC at the time from Court TV. And his dad is Floyd Abrams, the famed First Amendment attorney who argued New York Times v. Sullivan. So I just think, being open-minded to the facts helped me land in the right place. And on these cop shootings, that you just have to be open-minded. You have to be open-minded and go where the evidence goes.
That's phenomenal. Again, if you want the full conversation, an hour and 20 conversation between the two of us, very, very interesting. I promise that you will enjoy it. So many different angles to hit there. Encourage you to go seek it out on Wins and Losses with Clay Travis. When we come back, we'll dive back into the NFL, continue to discuss the upcoming weekend and more.